I'm supposed to talk about doing the right thing. You asked the wrong guy. I don't really know what the right thing is, but I've got a hunch you have a better idea of it than I have. But if there is a right thing, I think that we have to pay attention to each other. We live in a community. We're social creatures. If writing the column for as long as I have has taught me anything, it's that we're best in each other's company. But it's really hard work to pay attention sometimes because there are competing demands for our time. Our families, our friends, our children, our car that's falling apart, our bills that have to be paid, and we don't have enough money to do that, and just trying to get from one day to another. And sometimes it's hard to pay attention. All I try to do with what I do is to remind people that it's important to pay attention. I'm going to tell you two small stories, and I'm going to tell them fairly quickly. And I'll tell them from now until the end of time, and they have to do with paying attention. There was a guy in this town, Al Gosling. You may remember the name. Al was an older fella who lived in community housing, and yeah, I'm going to be an older fella sometime soon, I hope. And I kind of understood. Al, he was living in a rent-geared-to-income apartment. Small enough that you could not have got that piano into it, and if you did, you wouldn't have had any room for Al. And when you live in a rent-geared-to-income apartment, every year you have to fill out a declaration. And if you don't fill out that declaration, they start charging you market rent. Al was getting a little cranky. What do I have to do that for? I don't have another job. I'm not working part-time. I'm 83 years old, for Pete's sake. And he just ignored the letters that he got and reminding him that he was supposed to fill out these forms. And the next thing that happened was that you and I, through our agent, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, started charging him market rent. So his income, which was laughably minimal, all of a sudden he's paying. Arrears started building up. He started getting letters about arrears. So what do I have to read these letters for? It's just. And they were warning him that if he didn't clear up the arrears, I remind you, it's a fictional amount of money, because if he had filled out the damn form and signed it, arrears would not have built up. So the fact that there were arrears was a fiction. They kept telling him, if you don't pay up your arrears, we're going to change the locks on your apartment. Al was the kind of guy where he would, he had his life organized really neatly, and he lived in the north end of the city, and he would go down to the Loblaws on Queen's Quay, and he'd get a cup of coffee and a sandwich, and he'd read, bless his heart, the Toronto Star. And he had the habit of when he was finished reading the paper, he would tear it into little strips. And I don't know why he did that, but that's what he did. He came home from one of these trips one day and found that they changed the locks on his apartment. He couldn't get in. And he slept for a week in his building under the stairs. And nobody said anything, nobody did anything. Someone eventually called, for some reason, they called the cops. The cops took a look at him. He was starving to death. He was dehydrated. They got him to the hospital. The hospital fattened him up a little bit and made sure he was okay and stable, and they couldn't keep him. And they couldn't send him back to his home where he lived for 20-odd years. So they sent him to a shelter. And Al lived in the shelter for several months, and he was on the street for a couple of months, and he wound up back in the hospital again, which is when I heard the story, and I started telling the story, and the Toronto Community Housing Corporation was embarrassed profoundly by the fact that this became public knowledge, and they agreed to give Al his apartment back. And he died from the infection that he picked up in the shelter before he could return home. So at about 17 steps along the way, there was an opportunity for somebody to pay attention. Why isn't he answering his mail? Why isn't he responding? to the letters. Somebody just could have knocked and said, Al, what's going on? Can we give you a hand? No, nobody did that. Somebody could have noticed Al sleeping under the stairs. Al, what's the deal? You live here, you have a place, how come you're under the stairs? So at every step along the way, if somebody had been paying attention, and close attention, okay? I mean, like, we really have to concentrate on who we are and who's around us. Ask the damn question, pardon my language. Okay, good. I know I'm in the right place. That's my point. If somebody had paid attention, I know 83-year-old guys die, but he wouldn't have died like that. I'm going to switch briefly and talk about a subject which none of you know anything about, but which is a profound subject in the crowded downtown core, and that's bed bugs. Oh yeah, nobody knows anything about bed bugs here. I never knew anything about bed bugs until I got a call from a woman who said that she lived in a 17-story apartment building, and she had been bitten so badly by bed bugs that her arms swelled up, and she had to go to the hospital to get the swelling taken care of, and they gave her some kind of shot to bring the swelling down, and the shot provoked an epileptic seizure, and she was back at home, and I'm thinking to myself, geez, I haven't heard anything about bed bugs at all. And is this a story or not? And I wasn't going to do anything, and then I thought, well, you know what? Actually, if this is true, if she's living in a place that's so infested that she had to go to the hospital, and that if something happened as a result of her visit, well, you know, maybe she's not alone. Maybe there's other people. So I went to see her, and it turns out to be an even better story than just what I've just told you. Better in the larger sense. She was with her friend when I stopped by, and they said that 6 months prior, there was a change of superintendent in the building, and the old superintendent, I guess, was not very good at his job, and they went floor to floor in this apartment building and took an inventory of all the problems in the building with the intent that they would give that to the new superintendent when he came in to kind of give him some focus, some guidance. And 2 people in the entire building said that they had had problems with bed bugs. And the new super did nothing, and 6 months after that, 11 of the 17 floors were reporting infestations of bed bugs. Okay, that's pretty big. And then she tells me, you know, she says, I have chemical sensitivity. Oh, geez, you know, sometimes that's... my little spidey sense went up. I'm not sure quite what she was going to tell me. She said, when I came home, I started to smell gasoline. And she said, the smell was really strong, and I called one of the people from the building, and he came up, and he smelled it too, and we followed our noses down the corridor, and there was the place where it smelled the strongest. They opened the door, and inside that apartment was a guy sitting down with his shirt off, washing his body with gasoline. And he was washing his body with gasoline because he had been bitten really badly, and he was in the wounds were kind of open, and he had somehow heard that gasoline was the thing that would get bed bugs off you. Well, you know, I grew up in Northern Ontario, and when I was going to school, for the first 4 years of my school life, the first 3 rows of the school had the kids who had head lice, and their heads were all shaved, and then there was a row, and then there was all the rest of us. And I knew, because everybody knew, it was just common knowledge, that what you did for head lice was coal oil or kerosene. Well, you can drop a match in a bucket of kerosene, not much is going to happen. But either the person who told this guy got it wrong, or he misunderstood the deal, and there was a gas station across the street, and there he is sitting in his place with a bunch of gasoline washing his body. Can you imagine? After I wrote that column, the floodgates opened, And how bad the infestation was in this town was that one of our leading social service agencies, Wood Green, which is in, kind of on the eastern end at Queen Street around Wood Green Avenue, or wherever it is. Forgive me, I'm really lousy at geography. They changed all their furniture from cloth-covered furniture with cloth baffles to hard shell chairs and no cloth baffles at all, because the problem's so bad. Now, again, there's an opportunity. I step into this, there were bed bugs here long before I started writing about them, and there will be bed bugs here long after I'm gone. But had somebody been paying attention to that woman in that building, there would not have been a problem. Just as in every other building where there are infestations, and they're all over the place, and yeah, they're out here too. Those of us who have resources have a hard time getting rid of bed bugs, but by and large, if we've got resources, we can do it. But if you don't have any resources, and you depend on all the rest of us for your well-being, you require in that equation the rest of us to pay attention to you to help you solve your problems. And we do a lousy job of that in this town. Yes, there are terrific examples of things that are done right and done well here. But there are too many examples where we neglect to pay close enough attention to each other. And when we don't, I have this imagination. I imagine that all of the pain in the world has actual specific weight, and that the weight of this thing is on our shoulders all the time and we're not aware of it. And any time we have a chance to lessen that burden and we don't do it, we're not just hurting ourselves, we're hurting all the rest of us. Talk about preachy, eh? Wow. I like to think that one of the reasons people read the newspapers is not just to find out the news, but newspapers are a part of that process of paying attention. And it's the part of a newspaper like the Toronto Star, which is all knees and elbows, to pay attention on all our behalfs. I'm going to just give you a tiny bit of... I'm going to go back to my column here to talk. And my hearing is acute when I have migraine headaches. There should have been sirens on this particular evening, but I didn't hear a thing. I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning when a guy was being shot to death in a drugstore down the street from where I live. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd gone to the medicine chest. I was looking for my drugs in the dark. If that's what the guy who got shot was doing down the street, looking for drugs in the dark, he got more than he bargained for. I use that drugstore all the time. They carry old-fashioned razor blades, the kind that I use when I shave. They sell Polish Christmas cards. They sell dried herbs in plastic bags for tisanes such as you have not seen since you left Warsaw. I've never been to Warsaw. The post office is at the back of the store, past the lockers where the drugs are kept. How strange now to pass that place and buy stamps there. If you have to get shot by a cop, the drugstore is as good a place as any. St. Joseph's Hospital is down the street and around the corner a few hundred yards away. Not that it mattered. I'm guessing the guy would have died no matter where he was shot. St. Joe's is a good hospital, but I don't ever want to go there. Not since I was in the emergency one afternoon some years ago. I'd been riding along with the ambulance guys, and they were waiting for a patient to be admitted, and I noticed an ancient woman on a gurney, half covered by a sheet, half hidden by drapes. I saw her at that moment when she began to slip away. The nurse rang for the doctor. The doctor came in a hurry, a young guy, a really important guy. And the nurse said, "She's dying." And the doctor looked at the nurse and said, because he was really busy, he said, "What do you want me to do?" And then he walked away. What did I want him to do? I wanted him to put his hand on her old forehead and whisper in her ear. I wanted him to say, "It's okay. Don't worry. There's nothing left to fear. You did the best you could." I want my doctor to pay that kind of attention to me. I don't suppose anyone whispered in the ear of the man who got shot. He wouldn't have heard the chaos in the hospital, the pings and beeps of the machines, the clatter of knives, the sucking of tubes in his chest. His doctors did the best they could. Nothing else to be done. I don't know what happened in that drugstore in the dark. I do know that people make mistakes. We're all of us weak, and some of us are stupid, and some of us pay for our weakness with our lives. Nothing good happens in my neighborhood at 4 a.m. I'm glad I'm not a cop on the night shift. I'm glad I'm not a guy in a drugstore hours before the doors are opened. We walked down the block to Roncesvalles the next morning, not long after the shooting, and we had Saturday things to do. We stepped around the caution tape on the corner. There was a young cop on duty outside, tight-lipped and twitchy. You couldn't see much inside the drugstore where the forensics crew was at work. We walked up and down the street with our neighbors. We got a quart of milk, and we rented a movie, and for the first time in that year, I saw blood oranges for sale on the fruit stands. Sometimes when you pay attention, you see that little detail like that, blood oranges next to a place where there's just... how am I doing for time here? I have no idea. Nobody going anywhere? Okay. You were kind enough to invite me out here. I want to invite you into my neighborhood now. No shootings in this one, and no bed bugs. I live in Parkdale, which is a West End working class part of Toronto, although the class has been changing in recent years, as has the nature of the work. There are fewer lunch buckets and more laptops. The price of houses is rising. The old retired European couples are moving out, and there are more young families moving in every week. The baby carriages may not be so numerous as they were a generation ago, but they're more plush, and they have better suspension and wider wheelbases. And the young mothers like to push them as they jog along in the morning. Toronto's a city of neighborhoods. This is supposed to be our saving grace, the neighborhood as village. But you can live in your neighborhood all your life and never see the city. Just as you can live on Vancouver Island and never see the ocean. It rains in Rosedale and Parkdale alike, but in Rosedale they stay dry. One day as I was walking home from work, I noticed an old Polish lady rooting around on a neighbor's lawn. She was hobbled by age and arthritis. She was bent over, picking up horse chestnuts from under a tree and stuffing them into a plastic bag. I stopped. I asked her what she was going to do with all those nuts. She said she was going to take them home and put them in a pot and boil them up. And then she was going to mash them, and she moved her hands as she talked, miming a pot in one hand and a potato masher in the other, a gesture familiar to everyone here, I think. I asked her if she was going to eat the chestnut mash. She said no, not for eating. She was going to put the hot mash on her ankles, like a poultice. She said she had arthritis very bad and it was hard for her to walk, and the doctors gave her pills, but the pills didn't help, and she hurt all the time, hurt in her ankles, hurt in her knee. I could see how badly her legs were swollen. She said, there's no use sitting around doing nothing. That's us. That's us right there. That's who we are in Toronto. I picked up a chestnut, which was still slick from having just popped out of its casing, and I put it in her sack, and I asked if the hot-mashed horse chestnut poultice was an old Polish remedy. She said, no, Russian. I wanted to know more, but I was in some vague hurry, and I wished her well, and I went on my way, hoping that I'd run into her a little later so I could find out if the poultice worked. I have a proprietary curiosity. My knees, my shoulder. I never saw her again that fall. The snow fell. A year went by. Déjà vu. This time she was wearing a headscarf, a zippered sweater, a heavy skirt, and a pair of sturdy shoes with orthopedic stockings. She was bent over another lawn, stuffing more nuts in a sack. She looked a little older, a little slower, a little more tired. I introduced myself again, reminded her that we'd talked a year or so ago about the poultice. She straightened stiffly, narrowed her eyes, sized me up. I took a nut from the lawn and put it in her bag, just like I'd done the time before. And then she remembered, and I asked her if she was going to boil those nuts again. This time, no. She's going to soak them in alcohol. I suppose the poultice hadn't worked. I said, horse chestnut vodka? Not to drink. She said she was going to rub it on her ankle. Her ankle was spongy and swollen, worse than I imagined, really. The pale skin netted with spidery veins that hurt to look. I said I hoped the alcohol helped. I said using the alcohol as a rub was probably a good idea because horse chestnuts aren't good to eat and probably no good to drink. I know that horse chestnuts aren't good to drink because one time when my brother was, we were leaving Thunder Bay and he was looking for work in the western part of the country, and he had a job waiting for him if only he could get there, and I had some money, and so we spent all my money kind of getting to Toronto when we ran out of money actually in Hamilton, and we had to wait 3 days for his check to arrive to help him finish the rest of the journey. And I was, you grow up in a small town, it's embarrassing to beg because everybody knows who you are, and I hadn't realized that in a bigger city people don't know who you are, but I was still too embarrassed to beg. And I saw these chestnuts and I thought, hey, chestnuts, Italians eat chestnuts, not those kind. So I asked her if she was going to eat them, and I said I knew they weren't good to eat, and she said, I ate. Sort of stopped me cold. When had she eaten them? During the war. How did she prepare them? You grind them up. You make flour for bread. I said, horse chestnut bread didn't sound very good. When you're hungry, you eat. I asked where she spent the war. She said, Siberia. The Russians came through Poland. They rounded us up. They made us march all the way. I worked as a miner in a gold mine, standing in cold water, always cold, hungry all the time. I looked at her hands. Her palms were rough and square. Her fingers were thicker than mine, curled and gnarled and knotted. She rolled her stocking up and stepped into her shoe, and as she did, she talked. She said she lost 4 children during the war. When she came to Canada, she did all kinds of work in factories and on farms, picking tobacco, doing whatever she could to make some money because she had 3 more children, because life goes on. She got this arthritis working in that mine, and she hurt all the time now, and the doctors were no help, useless. And the kids are all grown, live in the suburbs, out of town. Their lives are their own. They're always busy. And she shrugged and she went back to picking up chestnuts. I can't imagine her life in the war. Her life here is no picnic. She's old and stiff and tired, and I get a little stiff and tired. I don't complain anymore about that. It's chestnut season now in my neighborhood. Coincidentally, the lady who lives next door to me lives with her mother, and her mother is old and of the same vintage, and I saw her on the lawn last year, I think it was, and it's a really, really nifty thing. You see those paintings of the European people in the fields kind of gleaning, right, catching the last of the stuff after the harvest has been taken off, and they've got she had her sweater pulled out like this, and she had it full of nuts. So she's my neighbor, and maybe she's a bit cranky and a little strange, but I got a couple of bags, and I went out and I gave her a hand, and I told her what I knew, which is the poultice, and I told her about the alcohol, and she said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And because I had helped her, she gave me a little pint of chestnut-soaked alcohol and said I should rub it on my joints. I smelled it. I haven't. But that part of my job, the fun part of my job, also requires that I pay attention, and sometimes it requires that I insert myself. And really, if we're talking about doing the right thing on a daily basis, we have to insert ourselves. It gets hard. it's difficult. Sometimes there's just so much grief going around that it can be difficult to sort of pay close attention to things that hurt. I'm just going to close by saying that I worked in the Arctic for a long time, and I worked on Baffin Island for the CBC. And we used to hire Inuit broadcasters from all around the island. We hired the best and the brightest, and we paid among the best wages in the north. And the CBC was pretty prestigious. The Inuit have an oral culture. Radio is an oral medium. The people we hired were really suited for the job, and it was an important time because the territory was heading towards division. And but much of my job was devoted to personnel stuff, because we would take people from their communities and bring them to the tiny little hellhole of Frobisher Bay, now Iqaluit, which was a really important thing to do from the point of view of journalism, and a really terrible thing to do from the point of view of culture. Because if you are an Inuk and you are successful in your culture, you stay at home and you look after your relatives. So we would bring people, they would get glory and good money and attention at the same time as they felt as if they were abandoning their culture. So sometimes people would just up and disappear, or sometimes people would act out a little bit. And so I was dealing with all kinds of personnel problems, and I was all alone. I was up there with just my son and me, and my bosses in Ottawa were very good at making sure I felt plugged in and connected. And whenever I would tell my friend Austin Curley, my boss Austin Curley, when I would tell him one of these stories about some impossibly bizarre thing somebody had done, Austin would say, "Isn't it wonderful to be human?" I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank you very much for inviting me here today. Thank you.